All right, while we're getting organized, there are CV for Erika here, and as well as some surveys. You can do it either on paper, or there's a QR code if you'd rather do it the techie way. So I appreciate any feedback that people are willing to give for any of these talks. So, thank you for being here for our second candidate, Dr. Erika Washburn. She comes to us from Wisconsin and Duluth, Minnesota, Twin Ports. She is currently the manager of the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. Which I found out last night that it's the reserve program is a NOAA program, but any of the managers and most of the people are actually hired by state, so she's technically a UW Wisconsin Extension employee. Prior to that, she worked for the Nature Conservancy down in this region, so she even knows Steve Woods and is willing to think about coming back in the region. She's also worked with NOAA at the Rural Research Station, as well as she was a 2010 NOWS Fellow for NOAA. Her academic background started in Boston, at Boston University, and then off to Texas. Didn't stick around in Texas very long, must have gotten it out of your system at Texas A&M for a master's degree, and then back to the East Coast, University of New Hampshire in Durham. Her background is more on the social science end of things. Her dissertation was to pave or not to pave, a social landscape analysis of land use decision making in Lamprey River watershed. I assume the Lamprey River is somewhere in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. So kind of the department was natural resources and an earth science, systems science program. I always like interdisciplinary department names like that because you never know what they actually do. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Erika's been up to and present us with some ideas about where we can move forward here at the Lake Erie Center. Thank you, Erika.
Great. Thank you all. So I was asked to give a little talk about sort of elements of my vision for the Lake Erie Center based on my understanding of the center and organization as it is, but also present a little bit more background about myself and sort of how I got here. So, I named this something that I'd love to see, I think, the Lake Erie Center be known for nationally as a center of excellence for supporting resilient coastal watersheds and thriving coastal communities. And I looking at that, the words Lake Erie are not in that National Center of Excellence title, but I feel strongly, a lot of the challenges in freshwater systems really, a lot of the challenges on the planet are human challenges. And so if you get the coastal watersheds and you get the communities and the social, cultural, economic, political decision-making moving in the right direction, it can help a lot and help solve a lot of the ecological challenges. So that was my idea to have a National Center of Excellence. And I will walk through this, I think. Is it frozen? Oh, really? Wait. Oh. Thank you. All right, so a quick outline. I'm going to talk about who am I and how did I get here, a little bit about my research and scholarship interests, some reflections on the mission of the center, the role of a director and the vision, strengths that I see in the Lake Erie Center, some opportunities, ideas I have, some questions I have, and my approach for some first steps. So as John sketched out a little bit more about my background and where I started, he said I come from a social science world, disciplinary. My disciplinary lens is really anthropology and archaeology. So it's looking at long-term relations between people and in place and environment over time. So when I went to Boston University, I double majored in marine biology and archaeology, and did some great work on neurophysiology at the Marine Biolab, looking at chemical dispersants and their effects on lobsters as a species. But I also was introduced to archaeology and kind of landscape scale coastal systems and how they change over time by spending some time in Greece, in northwestern Greece, and looking at that ancient landscape. And with discussions from some really truly excellent mentors at Boston University, they had advised me if you want to get into the environmental fields in the future, you need to have a foothold in the social sciences, because that's where all the challenges are human challenges. So as John mentioned, I went from there to Texas A&M University, which has a big anthropology department, and of course archaeology is a subdiscipline to anthropology. So I did a maritime archaeology program, so looking again at coastal systems and lakes and oceans and social interactions, societal interactions in those landscapes over a period of time. My master's thesis was actually a War of 1812 shipwreck up in Lake Champlain. As I mentioned, one of the wannabe Great Lakes. And it was great. Archaeology is really a jack-of-all-trades type discipline. So you do a lot of methodologies that fall on the natural science side as well as the social science side in conducting those digs, excavations, and archival work in addition. The bottom picture here shows actually a 15th century shipwreck in the middle of a cornfield in the Netherlands. So I was able to spend some time over there on an excavation to get some additional training. And of course that blew me away too. Like, there's cornfield and there's ships going by way in the distance, and then there's this 15th century wreck. And of course what I came to know is that the Dutch are incredible at coastal management and water management and spatial planning. They've been doing this for a millennia. And it made me want to go back and learn more about how the heck does that country operate and make decisions on the hundreds of years scale. So I applied for a Fulbright and was very fortunate to get that, and spent a year at Wageningen University, which is east of Amsterdam, studying coastal management, water management, and big spatial planning across the Netherlands. And it was in this experience that really the seeds were planted for my PhD work. Again, thinking about long-term spatial interactions in the landscape, resource management, policies, decision-making, etc. I came back to the States. I spent 2 years at Cornell, started to put together some of the pieces for this eventual PhD, studied GIS, regional planning, landscape architecture. I had a fellowship at the EPA in their coastal management branch in the Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds. That's EPA headquarters in DC. That is the branch office that manages the EPA's national estuary programs. There are no NEPs in the Great Lakes, but there are around the rest of the marine coast for the U.S. That was a very important experience. And after that time in DC, I started to navigate back to the Great Lakes, which is where I am from. And I took a position in a group that some of you may know about now. It's referenced as the National Museum of the Great Lakes, located here in Toledo. It's the Great Lakes Historical Society. At the time, I was based in Vermilion, just down the coast, and I was hired as the archaeological director for the Peachman Lake Erie Research Center. So, you know, thinking about my experience in the Netherlands and my time at the EPA, where I met my PhD advisor, also another really important mentor for me. I stayed in touch with him and eventually put together the PhD work through something called the Census of Marine Life. Some of you may have heard about that. That was a huge global 10-year study, nations all around the world looking at what has lived in the oceans, what is in the oceans, and what will be in the oceans in the future. It was an incredible experience. I actually would love to see a census of the Great Lakes do the same thing. Funded by the Sloan Foundation. And there were two sister institutes, University of New Hampshire, where my advisor was and where I finished my PhD, and where I started off at Syddansk Universitet, which is Southern Denmark University. I spent several years in Denmark under the Census of Marine Life, working there on the Wadden Sea. And if you know that area of Europe, that's a really fascinating UNESCO heritage maritime landscape shared by Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. And in that area, they have phenomenal decades of collaboration on monitoring and research, more and more education and outreach, same kinds of things that we have going on in this country, same kinds of challenges. So from there, I'm going to talk a little bit of my research interests. I will talk about the experience at University of New Hampshire, what my dissertation was. So going back to New Hampshire, which you can see in the middle picture here, tiny little coastline, very proud of it there, very proud of it. It's in the Gulf of Maine watershed, which is huge. There's multiple states and provinces in that watershed. And of course the Gulf of Maine itself serves kind of as an inland sea. That it has its own circulation. It's pretty complex to study. But in this coastal system was Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is my first experience with a NOAA-NER system. And you can see in this picture here on the top right, there's a lot of anthropogenic influence. You might be able to make out there's a runway here. There are airstrips, there's lots of roads. It's like heavy human influence on this landscape, which is the site of both the reserve and an NEP. So there's a lot of efforts trying to understand what's going on in this system. So I got there, and just like most other parts of the coastal world, the population in what they call the seacoast here has been exploding over the decades. So the images to the right show at the top 1950, at the bottom 2020, the state of New Hampshire is kind of leaning backwards, and these lines are the coastal population just sort of exploding. Everybody's moving to the seacoast. And of course what's happening then with that is you're getting increased impervious surface, you're getting land use development, you're getting changes in the watershed, and on top of that, of course, climate changes and precipitation changes, which are leading to more things like this. So in the few years that I was there, or that I was working on my PhD, they had 3 years of 100-year floods in a 5-year period. And so this is Newmarket, New Hampshire, under about 6 feet of water down the main street. This is not even right near the coast. This is up farther. And so there were a whole bunch of challenges here, and I went into this wondering, is there any way you can look at watershed-framed land use decision-making and start to get your head around what are some of the challenges socially and culturally, and how people are thinking about decisions related to landscape that might prevent this or make it less likely. So I used applied social science, qualitative analysis, and something called grounded theory methodology, and analyzed the social landscape of decision-making based on tons of interviews. So this kind of data is narrative, it's story, it's very deep and rich in detail, and you can code it for different themes. There's special analytical software you can use to help yourself out with this, and you wind up with patterns, in my case, of decision-making across the landscape. And in the process of doing this, I also use participatory action or action research, which is a well over 100-year-old methodology in the social sciences to engage sort of community members, participants in the co-creation of knowledge and data. They own the data. They see their stories in that data. It's very powerful. And I use PPGIS, or Public Participatory GIS, also very important. People have a hard time anywhere in the world understanding what the heck a watershed is or how they're related to it. And the farther away you are from the coast, it might be even more difficult. So common challenge. So those methodologies together led to some really important discoveries in this particular case study, and that was about the importance of embedding research in the communities themselves and making them a part of it, translating the science with visuals, listening to common stories. That's really important. That leads to new thoughts on adaptation and resilience and shared values. One of the interesting things that happened up there was at the end of this study, which was multidisciplinary. I was handling the social science side. We had aquatic ecologists and hydrologists participating on the natural science side. We had outreach and education as well. Is that people's political affiliations and ideologies sort of fell away. They started to see themselves, their experience, their decades or generations of life in this landscape as contributing to patterns that were now showing up in data. And it became a really powerful movement for them and created what I put at the bottom here, social capital among this group. And what they ended up doing, and this is 3 counties and 14 communities, was lobbying the state of New Hampshire for a new law to make land use planning watershed framed in this area. It was a really powerful experience. So this is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. This kind of social science integration is something that I would like to replicate and continue to build on in places like this. John mentioned I went from there to a Knaus Fellowship in DC. I have to say, for those interested in science and policy and management, if there's any way you can get a little bit of time in DC, maybe not too much, but a little bit of time, it's really helpful. The things you can learn there in terms of decision making, how the agencies collaborate, It's not something you can really read in a book or see in a movie and get a good handle on. So I was able to do some great things. I highly recommend the students in here consider Knaus Fellowships if you can. I did everything from work with the White House on President Obama's state visit to India to representing NOAA on the State Department's Global Freshwater Team, which is a very serious body of people that get together every month to talk about major global freshwater challenges and what U.S. science agencies and others can do to help. So great experience, but I wanted to get back to the Great Lakes. So I took a position as a contractor for GLERL, so I was in Ann Arbor, and I was the Lake-wide Action and Management Plan Coordinator for all 5 lakes. So my charge was to help NOAA think about the agency's engagement in those LAMP strategies and work groups and come up with some recommendations for how they could improve what they were doing. And again, this is really important for me because this area is home. So following that, I moved on to the Nature Conservancy. There was a really cool project, and some of you here might have heard about it or been involved. It was called the Western Lake Erie Coastal Conservation Vision, and it was funded in large part by DTE Energy. And what TNC wanted to do was work in just the Western Basin watershed, which involved staff from Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, huge multidisciplinary team. And they wanted to come up with ways that coastal conservation objectives could be reached along with human and community well-being objectives. So this is really kind of operationalizing something called ecosystem services, which is also a very important analytical framework and piece of scholarship interest for me. So the goal of the project was overall improving coastal systems, clean water, more resilient wildlife habitat, sustained ecosystem services, quality of life. And in this role, I worked heavily in the Western Lake Erie coastal communities, gained familiarity there along with all the collaborations underway in this area, of which there are so many. It's at times overwhelming to think about, and it needs some organization, as I've been talking to people about that today. In this role, I also helped lead an interdisciplinary team, and I used some of the methods that applied anthropology and other fields use to map out important cultural, economic, and social characteristics in the coastal landscape that were of value to the community. So these things might lead to decisions to restore certain areas, thinking there might be better paddle boarding or better ecotourism or other kinds of things that could deliver multiple benefits. And it would help TNC in the future think about political, economic, ecological trends and identify opportunities for how they could improve the coastal system and the communities within it. So that was that project. And kind of to sum up, overall, I think these are almost all the logos. My area of interest has always been really long-term relationships between people and coastal systems. That's where I've been working for the last couple of decades. So some reflections for you on mission, role of director, and vision. I'm sorry about these slides are a little formatting off. Where I am right now, Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. The reserves are a network system under the Coastal Zone Management Act. There's 29 sites. They're non-regulatory, non-advocacy, and are integrated programs to provide coastal innovations in coastal science and management. And the programs are very much like the programs of the Lake Erie Center. It's research, it's monitoring, it's education, outreach, and stewardship. And so, the picture on the right, you can see where all of the reserves are, and hopefully some of you know and have worked with Old Woman Creek, which is one of the system, and our colleagues down the coast. And the vision for the research reserve system is not unlike some of the elements of the vision for the Lake Erie Center. And it's resiliency in estuaries and coastal systems, and again, where human and natural communities thrive. So when I guess the other thing I will say is, for those of you who know Old Woman Creek, that's with Ohio DNR. They're the state lead. All 29 reserves have different federal-state partnership leading them. There are 8 reserves that are led by universities, and I'm at one of those. So I'm within the UW Cooperative Extension, as John said, in partnership with the local campus, UW Superior. So I'm already working heavily within a university culture and a university kind of system for the implementation of this program. So when I saw the the mission for the Lake Erie Center, I see a lot of similarities here in my professional work and the things that I have a lot of interest in. And where I see the human dimensions, of course, here are the land use pieces, the economics, sustainability. But this is very appealing to me. And when I was thinking about my vision, what would a national center of excellence be characterized by? These are just some examples, but I think it would be known by decision makers at multiple scales as providing the science-based solutions to challenges in the Lake Erie watershed, that it would be a model of interdisciplinary collaboration that really integrates, and this is the phrase that most of my colleagues are using now, is social, behavioral, health, and economic sciences. So really broadening out, not just socioeconomic or social and economic, but there's a lot of diversity in there. Advancing the concept of ecosystem services, competitive graduate programs, great workforce training and development for graduate students and undergrads. Strong community engagement and a lot of pride in the institution. Being recognized globally as a model for research and education in freshwater systems. This is a huge challenge all around the world. You look at large lakes, small lakes, similar challenges, different scales, but to be the place to go for the expertise, that's one thing I would think about. And of course, be well-known, trusted, and respected. There are some core elements to putting together this kind of a vision, and I think many of these things are already here. And it starts with the people and the relationships, strong partnerships, solid institutional support. That kind of underpins having a high caliber research program, having competitive undergrad and grad student engagement across different disciplines, having a strong education and outreach program. I was really excited to learn more about how research and education here are very well integrated. That leads to being able to deliver and co-create science-based information with local communities, and also leads to opportunities for more public and private sector collaborations. So when I think about the director's role, of course it's oversight of the budget, staff, facilities, advisory boards within a watershed scale framework. Those are all things I'm familiar with, and there's a couple of things at the bottom here, and I'm going to touch on that in a moment. But first, some of the strengths that I see in the Lake Erie Center, we'll do a little back and forth and show you these are the facilities at Lake Superior Reserve. So we have admin offices, lab, classrooms, meeting space, public interpretive space, docks, boats. Likewise here, and it's great to have the tour today and to see the great support and structure here and the potential in this place. I also just want to say I know facilities management is not can be a challenging thing, and my understanding is the university has strong structured support here, and there are some really great staff here that work on keeping things running, keeping things up to date and taken care of, and that makes a huge difference. That makes a huge difference. Frankly, I'm really blown away by the enormous array of fields at the University of Toledo. I did not realize how many different majors there were or graduate field opportunities, and it's incredible opportunities there. So I see real strengths in the professional fields, the natural social sciences, education, and I've talked with folks a little bit about that during my meetings so far today. I was particularly intrigued by this spatially integrated social science program and talked a little bit with Kevin this morning about that. And again, the strong institutional support. These things are really, really key to long-term success with a center of excellence. And then a scale. This is another thing that I have similarity working with. So the picture you can't see here because the slide's not working quite right. But the Lake Superior Reserve, just like all the other reserves, work with a watershed framework. And so we currently work in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's a huge watershed. But our programs have been expanding up the North Shore and down the South Shore of Lake Superior. So, I understand what it means to say you want to work from a watershed perspective. And as much as there's so much going on in the Western Basin here in Lake Erie, there's also more of the lake, and there's more communities, and there's more potential partnerships down the shore. So I think one of the things that you have to do as a director or a manager for a place like this is always be thinking about those things in multiple scales. and be open to some serendipity and some opportunities to partner, but also think strategically about where you can leverage resource and expertise and where you need to go out and get that from partners and then build those things. So I understand that scale of operations. More about partners. The reserves are required to have advisory boards meet quarterly, and we have a very strong functioning board at the Lake Superior Reserve with all the institutions there, but we have dozens and dozens and dozens of additional partners. We've actually made very strategic decisions to keep this a manageable group, and founded several other advisory subcommittees for additional partners to participate. I really think the use of advisory boards is important, and not just as a sharing around the table about what everybody's doing, but really getting good input, asking people for help, asking to help implement a strategic plan and help meet goals, help show that they're bought into the success of the organization. So I think having advisory boards is very important, and they do take management. And I was excited to see all the different advisory boards that are already in existence here. And of course the UT's Water Task Force. I understand that started to come about before the water crisis and then really got going afterwards. But it's really encouraging to me to see the diversity of people involved with the task force subcommittees and the Friends group. That's also very important. There are things that Friends groups and 501c3s can do that universities can't. So very important. Research. One of the questions I've answered a lot, or not a lot, several times today, is kind of the balance between natural and social sciences. For those of you who engage in different multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary work, there's different languages that are spoken between the social and natural sciences, and there's kind of cultural learning that happens there. I'm used to working in our research environment, which includes a variety of topics and more beyond these, but the reserves, invasives, restoration, aquatic ecology, climate, and social science. And again, I'm just really astounded by the number of topics under research here and all of the labs. And I started to look through all the links for publications and got really overwhelmed. And so I did this instead, just to sort of think about it differently. But this is all of the focus groups and plans for research strategies in a Wordle. And I love these things because sometimes things stand out that are kind of funny or make you reflect a little differently. But my point in just presenting this briefly today is that there are so many opportunities here to increase interdisciplinary collaboration and ways of engaging students, ways of engaging the community. There's so many topics that are very important at so many different scales. So I just see a tremendous amount of potential here. So I think I've covered all of these things more or less. Again, these are what I would consider our core elements of building a center of excellence. And now some opportunities and ideas. So one of the questions in the job description mentioned, building external partnerships, mentioned leading grant proposals, new initiatives that strengthen the research programs and expand the university's position. So I had a few things I just want to point out. I'm not spending a lot of time on, but I started to think about the research reserves and the system and the monitoring networks, and I just had a little chat with Tom about this too. I was wondering, are there partnership opportunities, or are there perhaps like a monitoring strategy that could be developed? Are there things that the reserves have done that would be helpful as a model for this Western Basin? And I can talk more about this, but these are the elements of the research reserves monitoring strategies. I mentioned social science research and ecosystem services. These are particular things that I would bring. Ecosystem services work, if you know much about this, it really is a holistic framework, which is a great tool for bringing in all kinds of disciplines to look at metrics, indicators, research, data gaps, how to engage different members of society, and how to develop strategies for resource management. And really all of the words in blue, in white here, are the kinds of topics that fall under ecosystem services frameworks. So just about anybody at a university can see their work reflected in these words to some degree. So there's lots of opportunities to build collaborations. Something that I've done up in Lake Superior that I'm interested in expanding is build a interdisciplinary work group. And up there it's called People and Places, and the work group is comprised of members from social science, economics, behavioral, human and community health, and humanities fields. And the goal is to work with those folks to increase and improve interdisciplinary collaborations with natural scientists and natural resource managers. That takes effort because within university systems, natural science structures work very differently than social science structures and departments. So it takes some creative thinking to work through that, but that's a real interest of mine. Another thought I had was I know the Lake Erie Center is looking for mechanisms to do more outreach to local government and natural resource agencies for information sharing. The NERS have something called the Coastal Training Program, which is very successful, very popular all over the country. And I would think this would be a great model to look at. Find a way to partner. I mean, Old Woman Creek is not that far away, but also perhaps use that model and build something like that here and expand the reach of that kind of an effort. It's a very powerful program up in our neck of the woods as well. And another, I think it's my last idea for a model opportunity. There was a specific reference to developing approaches to work more with educators and agencies to transfer the findings of research to the public and engage the public in the Lake Erie Center work. And all of the research reserves have programs called Teachers on the Estuary. One of the unique things that I've been really proud of for the staff at Lake Superior is our Deanna Erickson, our education coordinator, has built a teacher mentoring program. It's a very different model for engaging K-12 programs and is leading to real change in professional development with the teachers, with school districts, with the students, academic achievement. I mean, it's really delivering powerful metrics of change in the communities. And I think that model is something that could be looked at down here too. So an approach for some steps towards my vision. Very important to work with faculty and staff to understand their needs and opportunities. Gaining familiarity with the institutional procedures and culture. Every institution is a little different. I mentioned how important it is to work with advisory boards, understand operational conditions and financial status, discuss growth and professional development opportunities for faculty and staff. I think that's really important too. Engage with student groups. The students are here, the university's here because of the students. So what are the students excited about? What's driving you for your work, your thesis, your dissertation? That's important to understand and to support. Make inroads across the different departments on campus, and then build and strengthen community partnerships. Those are all really a broad suite of steps that I would see a new director would need to move into. And then last 3 slides are just for fun. This picture is probably something you have not seen. This is one of my favorite archival research bits from the TNC project. This is from a newspaper article in 1905. And the cool thing about this, as all of you are noticing right now, is that it's shifting the picture. Right? You always see Lake Erie with the east-west kind of layout. And when I looked at this, I was really kind of blown away. You know, when you know that Southeast Michigan, Northwest Ohio are socially and economically connected. There are people commuting back and forth. Detroit is huge in terms of the landscape and political landscape over time. There's a lot of connections here. And of course, like this picture is just showing that there used to be this interurban rail system that unfortunately was gone. But when it went in, other things happened. The highways followed, the interurban rail went away, but that rail line and then the highways cut the coastal communities off from the interior of the watershed. That happens all over the country too. Different scales, but it creates challenges for those coastal communities in multiple ways. But I love this image because I think this really is an important region and is the Western Basin for sure, but thinking more broadly, these connections between these cities and then moving up into the watershed itself. Another image that I think is important, and this is from the Ohio Historical Society. One thing that's starting to circulate as a framing concept and theory method within the research reserves and the National Marine Sanctuaries, which are sister programs within NOAA, is the concept of a maritime cultural landscape. There was a time where there were no highways or roads, and everybody got here because of the waterways, right? Everybody got here because of the waterways. And reframing a community, sort of looking at that historical landscape over time, how people connected to that, and sort of projecting that into the future is something I think that the design world tries to do. Architecture, urban planning, regional planning, and sometimes using things like maritime cultural landscapes, which I think are really cool operating principles and frameworks, can engage members of the community that you have not previously engaged. There are people that just love ships, and you probably know them. They track all the freighters, all the Lakers going through, people that just love lighthouses. They might not be engaged in water quality work, but there are other ways of engaging them, and sometimes it's telling that heritage story. And then my last slide is partnerships beyond just this area. There are, I think, some interesting similarities and opportunities between the western basins of Lake Erie and Lake Superior. There's strong research communities, strong collaborative communities working on monitoring and restoration and education and outreach. And I can tell you from being part of the UMD LLO submission to NSF for a new long-term ecological research program up in Lake Superior, that the community up in Lake Superior is very interested in comparative work with this community down here. You probably know that from interactions and conversations with folks, but this is an interesting case study at a grand scale, the two western basins. And I think there might be something there to think about in terms of what we could learn from each other, and literally upriver and downriver. But then there's also several other place-based programs. There's the 2 reserves, and then there will be 2 sanctuaries. There will be a total of 4 research reserves in the Great Lakes at some point. So these place-based programs that all have research, ed, outreach, stewardship angles, those are all places where we should take each other's innovations and run with them and not reinvent the wheel. So I think more networking and collaborations with those programs would be very smart. So I think that's it. I guess I'll just take some questions.
Thank you.
Well, Erika.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Lots of great ideas in there. Can you comment on a little more, sort of more specifically, some of your examples of leadership, who you're working with?
Mm-hmm.
In a little more detail, give us some examples
Sure.
of your leadership style.
Yep. So who I'm working with, it's a really, really, really long list. At the extremely local level, the City of Superior, multiple departments, the county, Douglas County, multiple departments, UW Superior, across departments on campus, as well as administrative units, the provost, the chancellor. Farther afield, the state agencies in both Wisconsin and Minnesota, so the DNRs and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which is kind of like Ohio EPA. The other universities and colleges in the region, and that extends throughout Wisconsin and Minnesota and up around to Lakehead in Canada. The tribes, very important partners up in Lake Superior. And then at a broader scale, all of the other research reserves across the country. So on a daily basis, I'm working with people in multiple time zones in similar positions. And then, the federal agencies, of course, very heavy on the NOAA side. Within NOAA, we have National Ocean Service regional staff down in Chanhassen in the Twin Cities. We work with them regularly. But also NOAA GLERL, the sanctuaries, Frank Lopez and his crew at Oldman Creek, and then all the people at NOAA headquarters. So it's local to national, multiple scales, everybody. So it's a lot of relationships to manage, and a lot of different kind of reporting hats to wear, I will say. And in terms of style, I like to collaborate. I like to be open with communication. I'm pretty good at multitasking, I'll say, and staying on top of emails with all kinds of projects and all kinds of things happening, whether it's literally a fire truck in the yard or a new MOU that's under development with a partner. Yeah.
Right, so you're doing a lot of things.
A lot of things.
All over the place.
Yes.
How about at your particular reserve? Is there many, what sort of numbers do you have of staff or students there that you're sort of working with sort of under one roof versus the larger scale or larger spatial scale things that you're doing?
So we have, including full-time and some part-time or different percentage FTEs, working with Reserve, we have about 10 people. Most of us are on site. There's traditionally been a couple down in Madison and one over in Green Bay, which are distances, quite significant distances from us. And then we have usually 6 to 8 undergrads or grad students at a time. In the summer, there's more opportunities for fieldwork for students to be working with us. We have a lot of UW Superior local undergrads that work with us from a number of different majors. But also we've had undergrads and grads from the Twin Cities, Madison, UMD, and then Lake Superior College, St. Scholastica up there. So a range of students and staff. You had a question, Tom?
Yes, when you're speaking about coastal communities in our area, coastal communities are not, there really aren't that many coastal communities around. It's more of a tourist economy where people come and there's a lot of marinas and sort of trailer parks that people come for the weekends during the summer, but coastal communities are kind of few and far between. So how would that change how you would reach out to people who are using the lake along the shoreline?
Yeah, so when I think about coastal communities, I'm also thinking about what has been a functioning community and what remains today. So, for example, I'm just trying to remember, in Luna Pier, a lot of the houses and properties have been handed down to grandkids and further on down the line over the years. And what was a really functioning, vibrant community in like the 1920s it's different today. They've lost social capital. They've lost local businesses. There are real challenges that come with that. So they're either driving down to Toledo or up to Detroit or other places for work. And there's all kinds of economic challenges as a result of that. So I think about it not just what the current status of the community is, but how that's changed over time a little bit. The other thing I guess I would think about here in reaction to your question is there are a lot of people that love to come to Lake Erie and actually Lake Superior and the other lakes that live in Iowa and Nebraska. You know, and they come here to go fishing, you know, during the summer as part of their family heritage. So I think one of the challenges is engaging with those communities of people that are at a distance but have a love for the area and have a tie to it. Maybe they have a second house or they have a cabin. Maybe they belong to a hunting fishing lodge, something like that. But that's an important group to find a way to tap into, and it's a challenge all over the Great Lakes because it's a very common phenomenon. But you know, I think getting a sense of, you know, the deep work I did in Luna Pier was really informative to me in terms of how the people there were feeling about the community and what they thought their options were, and how they were concerned about the loss of tax revenue with the closure of that power plant. And they were looking for opportunities for how they could start new businesses, ecotourism, something else. How could they reconnect with the lake and the environment? And it would have to be healthy to do so. So it meant having really deep conversations with people. So just some reactions there, but yeah. Are there kinds of questions or?
So you talked a lot about coastal communities, I mean, obviously, and you've done a lot of analysis on a large scale. Can you talk about, I mean, so a lot of what's feeding some of our problems is the agricultural system. What's your experience working with agricultural communities?
Yeah, so certainly, you know, with the T&C work, there was an agricultural element to that. There were outreach and engagement with farming communities. I know that Ohio State University really has a foothold on that. It's probably not even the right word to use. It's awful. It's kind of a light word. Ohio State University has a real place for that in their work and their focus. And I know there was, I'm trying to remember the name, it was an interdisciplinary team that had an NSF grant out of OSU that was doing work on farmers' behavior and decision-making and what was driving it. I can't remember what their...
Robin Wilson.
Yep, Robin Wilson, Eric. Yep, I can't remember the range of other folks involved with that. But those are really interesting projects to me because they do go after some of the both qualitative and quantitative data to try to understand behaviors and choices and decision-making. So I have a sense of what's going on in some of those research areas and in some of the programs from groups that are trying to tackle those challenges. I will say not an awful lot of agriculture in New Hampshire. Yeah, it's too rocky.
Yeah. Any other questions for Erika? Great, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
So again, I appreciate any of your feedback, whether it be on paper or electronically. So we got some time. Next week we have one seminar on Monday as well as on Wednesday. So hopefully we'll all be able to make that. Yes. You weren't able to talk with Rachel today, so she just asked if you guys can take it out like 5 minutes. So 5 minutes with them, and then we'll meet as a search committee for about half an hour. Okay. And then we'll be done. Exactly. Thank you. That was good. Yep.
And I have data on here.
I won't format it, I'll just... Safe to remove hardware.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then it's just